That's the kind of car you drive when life has stopped expecting anything from you. The voice came from the marble steps of Sterling Plaza, just as Claire Whitman turned off the engine of her silver 2009 Toyota Camry, the old sedan, giving one final tired shudder beneath the shadow of a 42-story glass tower. Around her, morning traffic moved like polished metal through downtown Chicago, black SUVs sliding to the curb, Teslas whispering into reserved spaces, a champagne-colored Mercedes easing past her with the quiet arrogance of money that had never missed a payment. Claire sat still for one breath, both hands resting on the steering wheel where the leather had worn smooth beneath her palms. The car smelled faintly of coffee, winter rain, and the vanilla air freshener clipped to the vent 2 months ago and forgotten. Outside, the building rose above her, all mirrored windows and steel edges, catching the pale October sunlight until it looked less like an office building than a blade held upright against the sky. She had not planned to arrive at exactly 8:15, when the lobby would be full and the people who measured worth by watches and handbags would be spilling through the revolving doors with their paper cups and important expressions. But fate, she had learned, had a cold sense of timing. She opened the door, and the Camry gave a small creak that sounded louder than it should have. A few heads turned. Then a few more. The valet, a young man in a black coat, hesitated as if unsure whether the car belonged in front of Sterling Plaza or had simply lost its way. Claire stepped out carefully, smoothing the front of her cream wool coat, an old one, clean but softened at the cuffs. Her dark blonde hair was pinned low at the nape of her neck. Her purse was brown leather, practical, scratched near the buckle. Nothing about her announced power. Nothing sparkled. Nothing begged to be noticed. And that, perhaps, was why the laughter traveled so easily. It began as a small sound near the entrance, bright and sharp, like a spoon striking crystal. Vanessa Cole stood beside one of the tall planters, wrapped in a red designer coat that looked untouched by weather, her glossy brown hair falling over one shoulder, her smile already blooming with recognition. At her side was Nathan Brooks, Claire's ex-husband, looking exactly as the city liked its successful men to look at 8:15 in the morning. Tailored navy suit, silver watch, confident posture, and eyes that had forgotten how to be kind. Behind them clustered 3 employees from his firm, young analysts with expensive shoes, and the eager cruelty of people still trying to prove they belonged. Nathan's gaze moved from Claire's face to the Camry, then back again, and something almost tender crossed his expression, not tenderness itself, but the performance of pity. "Claire," he said, loud enough for the others to hear, "I didn't realize you were still driving that thing." Vanessa covered her smile with 2 fingers, not quickly enough. One of the analysts looked down, pretending to check his phone, but his shoulders shook. Claire closed the car door with a soft, final click. For a moment, she felt the old instinct rise in her chest, the one marriage had trained into her like a reflex. Explain yourself, make them comfortable, shrink before anyone can accuse you of taking up space. She could almost hear the woman she used to be apologizing for the rust near the rear wheel, for the coffee stain on the passenger seat, for arriving in a car that did not match the glass tower behind her. But that woman had been buried slowly, not in one dramatic moment, but in quiet mornings and signed papers, empty rooms, and nights spent learning the difference between loneliness and peace. Claire reached into the car and picked up a slim black folder from the passenger seat. Inside it were documents Nathan had not seen, signatures he did not know existed, and a deed that had turned Sterling Plaza from a symbol of his world into an asset in hers. In her coat pocket, a black access card pressed lightly against her hip, still warm from her hand. Nathan stepped down one stair, lowering his voice into that polished tone he used when he wanted an insult to sound like concern. "Are you here to see someone? Because if you need a contact in HR, I can probably make a call." Vanessa tilted her head. "That's sweet of you, Nathan. It must be hard starting over at this age." The words landed in the cold air between them, delicate and poisonous. Claire looked at Vanessa, then at Nathan, then past them to the revolving doors reflecting the old Camry, the marble steps, the clean, bright face of a building everyone thought they understood. A city bus hissed at the curb. Somewhere inside the lobby, elevator bells chimed. Claire's breath came out in a pale ribbon. She did not raise her voice. She did not defend the car. She did not tell them that the private parking level beneath their feet had been reassigned that morning, or that Nathan's company would soon receive a notice requiring immediate review of its lease violations. She only pressed the lock button once, and the Camry answered with a humble little beep that made Vanessa smile again. Claire returned the smile with one so calm it made Nathan's expression falter. "It still gets me where I need to go," she said. Then she walked past them, her heels quiet against the marble, carrying the black folder through the revolving doors of Sterling Plaza, while the people who had laughed at her car watched without understanding that she had not come to ask for a place in their building. She had come to take ownership of it. Claire crossed the lobby as if the laughter had never touched her, though every sound behind her followed like a shadow against the polished marble floor. Sterling Plaza was awake now, breathing money and motion through its 42 stories. The revolving doors whispered open and closed. The security desk glowed beneath a wall of dark stone. Men and women in tailored coats moved toward the elevators with the practiced impatience of people who believed the world would wait if they walked fast enough. Claire had once lived among people like this, not inside this building, but inside the same language of status, the same quiet hunger to be seen standing beside the right names. Years ago, when she was still Claire Brooks, she had known which fork to lift at charity dinners, which donor loved Napa wines, which senior partner expected a handwritten thank you note instead of an email. She had known how Nathan took his coffee before board meetings, how he needed silence the night before a major pitch, how he would leave a tie on the bed and pretend not to ask which one made him look more trustworthy. She had made him look effortless. That was the part no one remembered. To the outside world, Nathan had risen through brilliance alone, a self-made executive with clean instincts and sharper timing. In the private rooms where success was actually assembled, Claire had been the one smoothing rough edges, rewriting sentences, remembering birthdays, moving people gently into the places Nathan needed them to stand. She had not minded at first. Love, when it was young, had made service feel like devotion. She had believed marriage meant building one life with 4 hands, even if only 2 hands were photographed holding the award. But the higher Nathan climbed, the smaller he made her feel. It started softly, the way cold enters a room through a narrow crack. He would smile at parties when she spoke, but later in the car he would say she had shared too much. He would thank her for helping with a presentation, then introduce the idea as his own. He would call her grounded when they were alone, then ordinary when he was angry. Ordinary became his favorite word for her, polished enough to pass as harmless, cruel enough to leave a mark. She remembered standing in their kitchen at 2 in the morning, the skyline glittering beyond the windows, while Nathan told her she did not understand ambition because she had never truly wanted anything big. The memory still had a temperature. It was cold glass beneath her bare feet, cold coffee in the sink, cold certainty blooming in his voice. Vanessa had not created the distance between them. She had simply stepped into it wearing perfume, confidence, and the look of a woman who knew a vacancy when she saw one. Back then, Vanessa had been the new marketing director, all bright smiles and strategic praise, laughing at Nathan's jokes before he reached the punchline. Claire had noticed the late texts, the sudden password changes, the careful way Nathan placed his phone face down at dinner. When she asked, he made her doubt the question itself. He told her she was tired. He told her she was insecure. He told her she was inventing drama because her own life felt empty. By the time the truth became impossible to ignore, Nathan had already prepared the version everyone else would hear. Claire was emotional. Claire was difficult. Claire had never supported the pressure he carried. The divorce papers arrived with the same clean efficiency as a business memo, and the settlement was just generous enough to look decent to strangers while reminding her exactly how little power she had allowed herself to keep. The elevator doors opened in front of her now, reflecting the woman she had become, composed, pale under the soft lobby lights, holding a black folder that weighed less than a pound and carried 5 years of silence. A security guard looked up from his desk and began to ask for her identification, then stopped when his screen refreshed. His posture changed first, then his face. "Good morning, Ms. Whitman," he said, more carefully than necessary. "The management team is expecting you on 41. Claire gave a small nod. "Thank you." Behind her, through the glass wall of the lobby, she could still see Nathan and Vanessa outside near the steps, delayed by their own amusement, unaware that the building had already recognized her before they had. Claire stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut, cutting off the street, the marble, the old life waiting outside in a navy suit and a red coat. As the numbers began to rise, she looked at her reflection and felt no triumph yet. Only the steady quiet of a woman who had finally stopped asking to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding her. The 41st floor of Sterling Plaza did not feel like a workplace as much as a stage built for people who wanted to be watched. The elevator opened into a reception area of pale stone, smoked glass, and brushed steel, where a living wall of ferns climbed behind the front desk like nature had been hired, trimmed, and instructed not to grow too freely. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive coffee. Beyond the glass partitions, Claire could see rows of offices glowing with blue computer light, conference rooms named after American cities, and framed photographs of company retreats where everyone smiled, as if exhaustion were a lifestyle choice. This was Nathan's kingdom now, the place where he had rebuilt the story of himself after their divorce. Here, he was not the man who had broken promises in a quiet kitchen. He was the visionary, the closer, the man other men lowered their voices around. Claire paused near the reception desk, giving the office a single, steady look. No one recognized her at first, and that was almost comforting. A receptionist with a smooth ponytail and a silver name badge glanced up with a professional smile that changed into mild uncertainty when she saw Claire's coat, her simple purse, the black folder held against her side. "Good morning," the receptionist said. "Do you have an appointment?" Claire answered before the old humiliation could find a place to settle. "Yes, with building management." The receptionist looked down at her screen, typed, then stilled. Her eyes moved once to Claire's face, then back to the screen. Something in her posture tightened, not with fear, but with the sudden awareness that a person might be more important than they appeared. "Of course, Ms. Whitman. They are in conference room Chicago. Mr. Halpern asked me to send you straight in." Claire thanked her and continued down the corridor, passing the glass offices where Nathan's employees lived inside spreadsheets, projections, and rumors. Two young men near the copy station looked up and whispered to each other. One of them had been outside only minutes earlier, laughing beside Vanessa. Now his face showed the first faint crack of confusion. Claire did not slow down. She had learned in the past 5 years that dignity had a rhythm. It did not rush. It did not linger for approval. It simply moved forward. Behind one glass wall, Vanessa was standing with a group of co-workers, one hand wrapped around a paper cup, her red coat now draped over her shoulders like a banner. She was retelling the scene downstairs, smiling through the part where Nathan offered Claire help, turning another woman's silence into entertainment. Claire heard only fragments as she passed. "The car, so awkward, poor thing." The words slid over her without entering. Once, they would have pierced her open. Once, she would have carried them home, examined them in the dark, and wondered which part of herself had invited that kind of contempt. Now she understood something Nathan and Vanessa did not. People who needed an audience for cruelty were rarely as powerful as they seemed. The true power in a room was often the person no one was watching closely enough. Conference room Chicago waited at the end of the corridor, its frosted glass door half open. Inside, 3 people stood when she entered. Martin Halpern, the gray-haired property manager who had run Sterling Plaza for 18 years, Angela Ruiz, the attorney overseeing the transfer, and Thomas Bell, a senior facilities director with a stack of binders arranged neatly in front of him. Their expressions were respectful, almost cautious, as if they had spent the morning studying the difference between the woman on the documents and the woman who had just walked in from the lobby. "Ms. Whitman," Martin said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Sterling Plaza." Claire shook his hand. His palm was warm and dry. The words settled around her with a strange softness. Welcome. Not tolerated. Not pitted. Not invited as someone's former wife. Welcome. For a brief second, her throat tightened, but she lowered herself into the chair at the head of the table before anyone could notice. Angela opened the first folder and turned it toward her. The deed was recorded at 7:32 this morning. The lender acknowledgments are complete. As of today, Whitman Holdings is the official owner of the building. Claire looked down at the page, at the clean black letters spelling out what years of discipline had made real. Outside the room, through the frosted glass, footsteps gathered and slowed. Whispers moved along the corridor. Nathan had built his life on appearances, but a building had no use for appearances. It answered only to ownership, signatures, and terms. Claire picked up the pen Angela offered her and signed the final acknowledgement with a calm hand, while somewhere beyond the glass, the first person in Nathan's office began to understand that the woman they had laughed at downstairs had arrived above them not as a visitor, but as the name on the door they had never thought to read. Nathan did not hear the news from management. He heard it from the silence. It began at the edge of his office like a draft slipping beneath a closed door, subtle enough to ignore until the temperature of the room had changed. He was standing near the window with his phone in one hand, half listening to a junior associate explain a delayed client report, when he noticed people looking away too quickly as he turned. Across the hallway, two analysts who had been laughing 15 minutes earlier now stood by the copy station with their voices lowered and their faces emptied of amusement. Vanessa was near the marketing bullpen, still holding her coffee, but her smile had thinned into something brittle. She kept glancing toward Conference Room Chicago, as if the frosted glass might suddenly explain itself. Nathan disliked uncertainty. He had built his career by controlling rooms before he entered them, by learning where the exits were, who wanted praise, who feared embarrassment, who could be moved with pressure and who could be bought with attention. But this silence did not respond to him. It spread without permission. His assistant, Emily, appeared in his doorway, her tablet clutched against her chest. "Nathan," she said, then corrected herself because others were near. "Mr. Brooks, building management, is on the floor. They are asking for a tenant leadership meeting at 10. He frowned. "Building management does not ask for meetings during market hours." "I know." Emily swallowed. "They said it concerns the ownership transition." The phrase irritated him before he understood why. Ownership transition. It sounded procedural, harmless, one of those phrases attorneys use to wrap inconvenience in clean paper. Sterling Plaza had changed hands before. Properties moved between funds, trusts, and holding companies all the time. The tenants were notified, the lobby flowers changed, the rent checks went to a different address. Nothing important ever shifted for men like Nathan, because men like Nathan expected the ground beneath them to remain expensive and stable. "Who is the new owner?" he asked. Emily looked at the tablet, then hesitated for half a second too long. That hesitation was the first crack. "The acquiring entity is Whitman Holdings." The name passed through the room softly, but Nathan felt it land with the weight of something dropped from a great height. Whitman. For one absurd moment, his mind refused the connection. Whitman was a common enough name. There were lawyers named Whitman, investors named Whitman, families with old Chicago money and private foundations. It did not have to mean Claire. It could not mean Claire. The woman downstairs with the faded coat and the aging Camry had not walked into his building as the representative of anything powerful. She had looked like a memory he could still afford to pity. Vanessa stepped closer, her voice carefully light. "That is not her company, right?" No one answered quickly enough. Nathan turned toward the corridor. Through the long glass walls, he could see movement around Conference Room Chicago. Martin Halpern emerged first, gray suit, serious face, followed by Angela Ruiz with a folder held close to her side. Then Claire appeared behind them. Not timid, not lost, not waiting for someone to tell her where to stand. She walked with the quiet steadiness of someone who had already been recognized by the only people whose recognition mattered. The black folder was still in her hand. The same folder he had barely noticed outside. Nathan felt a strange, dry pressure at the back of his throat. He remembered the way she had looked at him on the steps, the small calm smile, the sentence he had dismissed as pride covering embarrassment. "It still gets me where I need to go." Now the words returned with a precision that made his face warm. Around him, his employees had begun to understand before he allowed himself to. Their eyes moved between Claire and Nathan, measuring the distance between the joke they had witnessed and the fact walking toward them in low heels. Vanessa's fingers tightened around her coffee cup until the lid bent inward. Claire did not look at either of them at first. That was worse than anger. Anger would have given Nathan something familiar to manage, something emotional to dismiss. Her indifference left him standing in a suit that suddenly felt too polished, too rehearsed, too small for the moment. Martin stopped in front of the reception area and addressed the floor with the careful authority of a man introducing a permanent change. "Good morning, everyone." We will need department heads and senior leadership in the main conference room at 10 o'clock. Ms. Whitman will be joining us regarding the building's new ownership and updated tenant compliance review. The name moved through the office like a bell struck once. Ms. Whitman. Not Claire. Not Nathan's ex-wife. Not the woman with the old car. Ms. Whitman. Claire finally turned her eyes toward Nathan, and in them he found no accusation, no plea, no trace of the woman who once waited up for him in a kitchen full of cold light. She gave him the same polite nod she might have given any tenant. Then she continued down the hall, leaving him with his employees, his fiancée, and the terrible understanding that the first insult of the morning had not wounded her. It had only revealed them. At 9:58, the main conference room filled with the uneasy politeness of people who had not yet decided whether they were witnessing a minor administrative inconvenience or the beginning of a public reckoning. The room sat on the northeast corner of the 41st floor, where two walls of glass looked out over downtown Chicago and the silver line of the river bending between towers. On any other morning, Nathan would have used that view like a weapon. He would have stood at the head of the table with the skyline behind him, letting the city frame his ambition, letting junior employees imagine that success looked exactly like his suit, his watch, his calm command of the room. But today, the head of the table remained empty. Martin Halpern had placed a small name card there with simple black lettering, Claire Whitman. Nathan noticed it the moment he entered, and something in his jaw tightened. He chose a seat along the side instead of challenging it, a decision that felt reasonable and humiliating at the same time. Vanessa sat beside him, her red coat gone now, replaced by a white blouse and a careful expression. She had reapplied her lipstick. The color was perfect, but her hand had not been steady enough to hide the faint line at one corner. Around the table were department heads, legal staff, two finance directors, Emily with her tablet, and a few people who had no reason to be there except curiosity disguised as responsibility. The laughter from the lobby had vanished so completely it seemed impossible that it had ever existed. In its place was the low hum of ventilation, the soft clicking of pens, the dry whisper of paper being rearranged by hands that needed something to do. When Claire entered, no one spoke. She came in with Angela Ruiz on one side and Martin on the other, still wearing the cream coat she had worn downstairs, though now it looked less like evidence of decline and more like proof that she had never needed costume jewelry to command attention. She removed the coat slowly and draped it over the back of the chair at the head of the table. Beneath it, she wore a charcoal dress, simple, structured, and quiet. Nathan remembered a time when he had told her gray made her disappear. Now the color made the room seem too loud. Claire sat, opened her folder, and looked around the table without rushing. Her eyes passed over Vanessa, then Nathan, with no visible change. That calm was becoming unbearable. Nathan wanted a crack, a tremor, some sign that the woman beneath the title was still the woman he knew how to wound. Instead, she folded her hands over the documents and began in a voice clear enough to reach the farthest seat. Thank you for coming on short notice. As of this morning, Whitman Holdings has assumed ownership of Sterling Plaza. For most tenants, daily operations will continue without disruption. However, certain leases have been flagged for compliance review, including the lease held by Brooks Meridian Group. The company name seemed to stiffen in the air. Nathan leaned back slightly, as if distance could turn her words into procedure. Compliance review? He asked, giving the phrase a soft edge of disbelief. Claire, with respect, we have occupied this floor for 6 years. The use of her first name was deliberate, a small claim staked in front of witnesses. Claire looked at him for one quiet second. In this room, Mr. Brooks, please address me as Ms. Whitman. The silence that followed was not loud, but it was complete. Vanessa lowered her eyes to the table. Emily stopped typing. Nathan's face held its shape, but color rose slowly along his cheekbones. Claire did not enjoy it. That was what made the moment so clean. She was not there to embarrass him. She was there to correct the record of power. Angela slid a packet toward Nathan's side of the table. The preliminary review found unauthorized structural modifications to conference areas, repeated after-hours access violations, unpaid common area maintenance adjustments totaling $86,000, and use of shared loading facilities for private corporate events without approval. Nathan's expression sharpened. Those were legacy arrangements with the prior owner. Martin cleared his throat gently. There is no signed amendment on file. Claire turned one page. The sound was small, almost graceful. You will have 30 days to cure outstanding financial issues and submit documentation for all alterations. After that, the new ownership will determine whether the lease remains in good standing. Vanessa finally looked up, her voice sweet but thin. Surely this can be handled privately. There is no need to make this uncomfortable. Claire met her eyes then, and for the first time that morning, something colder than politeness moved across her face. Uncomfortable is not the same as unfair. No one laughed. No one even shifted. Beyond the glass, Chicago carried on beneath the pale October sky, indifferent and glittering. Nathan stared at the packet in front of him as if the pages had betrayed him. Claire closed her folder. The meeting had lasted less than 12 minutes, but the world Nathan had built on charm, assumption, and borrowed authority had already begun to tilt. And at the head of the table, the woman he once described as ordinary sat beneath her own name, calm as stone, while every person in the room understood that ordinary had never meant powerless. The meeting ended without anyone standing too quickly. That was how Claire knew the room had understood her. People remained in their chairs for a few careful seconds, looking at papers they had already read, gathering pens they did not need, giving themselves small tasks to cover the discomfort of having watched a man lose control of the story he thought belonged to him. Nathan was the last to reach for the packet. His fingers closed over the pages with a measured calm that belonged more to pride than confidence. Vanessa rose beside him and smoothed her blouse, but the gesture did not restore what the morning had taken from her. The red coat, the laugh at the entrance, the easy certainty that Claire was someone to pity, all of it seemed to hang around her now like perfume gone sour. Claire slid her documents back into the black folder and stood. Martin and Angela began discussing next steps near the door, their voices low, professional, ordinary in a way that made the moment sharper. This was not a scene to them. It was business. That almost made Claire smile. 5 years ago, she would have mistaken Nathan's silence for danger. She would have watched the angle of his shoulders, the set of his mouth, the small signs that told her whether the evening would become cold, whether dinner would pass with one-word answers, whether she would spend hours trying to repair damage he refused to name. Marriage to Nathan had taught her to read weather indoors. She could still remember the first year, when his ambition had felt like sunlight. They had lived in a small apartment in River North then, with a kitchen barely wide enough for 2 people and a view of another brick wall across the alley. Nathan used to practice presentations in the living room, while Claire sat cross-legged on the floor with a legal pad, timing him, sharpening his phrases, reminding him to pause before the strongest line. He would pull her up afterward and spin her once beneath the cheap ceiling light, laughing as if the future had already opened its doors. Back then, she had loved the hunger in him because she believed it had room for both of them. Success changed the size of that room, or perhaps it only revealed it. The first promotion came with better suits. The second came with dinners where Claire learned to smile through conversations that treated wives like accessories with charitable interests. Then came the condo with floor-to-ceiling windows, the private gym membership, the car Nathan said made sense for appearances, the friends who never asked what Claire wanted because Nathan always answered first. She did not notice herself disappearing at once. It happened in refinements. A softer dress because Nathan said the blue one was too noticeable. A quieter laugh because he said investors like composure. A postponed certificate program because he needed her free for a client trip to Scottsdale. Each compromise looked small from the outside. From the inside, they were bricks sealing a window. The final year of their marriage had been a museum of almosts. Almost honest conversations. Almost apologies. Almost proof. Vanessa had arrived at Brooks Meridian Group with a bright resume and an instinct for proximity. She praised Nathan in public with just enough admiration to sound professional, laughed at his private complaints with just enough sympathy to seem rare. Claire saw the change before she had words for it. Nathan checked his phone more often. He stopped asking for her notes. He began saying Vanessa understood the pace of his world. When Claire questioned him, he looked exhausted by her pain, as if her suspicion were the true betrayal. "You are creating problems because you do not have enough of your own," he had said one night, standing by the same kind of window that now surrounded the conference room. The sentence had stayed with her longer than it deserved. It had followed her through the divorce, through the polite legal letters, through the apartment she rented with secondhand furniture, and a view of a parking lot in Oak Park. For months after leaving, Claire woke before dawn with the old panic in her chest, reaching for a life that had already rejected her. Then, slowly, something unexpected happened. The silence stopped feeling empty. It became space. She took a job answering phones at a small commercial real estate office because the owner, an older woman named Marjorie Fields, noticed Claire correcting a lease summary while waiting for an interview and hired her before lunch. The office smelled of printer toner and burnt coffee. The carpet was worn flat near the filing cabinets. The work was unglamorous, precise, and strangely healing. Buildings did not flatter. Contracts did not pretend. Numbers did not call a woman ordinary to keep her obedient. Claire learned how value hid beneath neglect, how debt could disguise opportunity, how the people who shouted the loudest in negotiations were often covering weak positions. She learned, in other words, to see what others missed. Now, standing in the conference room Nathan used to command, Claire looked at the skyline and felt that old sentence loosen its last grip. She had not created problems because she had too little of her own. She had solved problems he never even knew how to read. Behind her, Nathan finally spoke, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You could have told me." Claire turned, holding the black folder against her side. "You could have asked who I had become." Then she walked out before he could decide whether to apologize, argue, or pretend he had meant something else. The hallway outside the conference room seemed longer than it had before, not because Claire was lost, but because every glass wall now held a reflection of the life she had escaped. She could see herself moving past offices where people lowered their voices, past framed awards bearing Nathan's company name, past the sleek furniture and curated art that tried so hard to make ambition look tasteful. 5 years earlier, she would have walked through a place like this with her shoulders tight, measuring herself against every polished surface. She would have wondered whether her coat looked expensive enough, whether her voice sounded educated enough, whether the receptionist could tell she had grown up in a house where coupons were clipped on Sunday nights and new shoes were bought only when the old ones could not be repaired. Nathan had found those small histories charming when they were dating. He called her practical, sincere, refreshingly real. Later, after money had softened his hands and sharpened his pride, he treated the same truths like stains she should have learned to hide. Claire remembered the charity dinner where it first became clear to her. They were seated at a long table beneath chandeliers in a hotel ballroom on Michigan Avenue, surrounded by people whose laughter carried the confidence of inherited ease. Someone had asked Claire where she learned to cook, and she had smiled, saying her mother had worked double shifts at a diner in Joliet and taught her how to make a pot roast stretch for 3 meals. The table had received it politely enough, but Nathan's hand had tightened around his water glass. In the car afterward, his silence was so dense it filled the leather seats. "You do not have to tell everyone every humble detail," he said at last, eyes on the road. "There is dignity in privacy." She had believed him then. She had mistaken shame for sophistication because he handed it to her in a calm voice. That was how his cruelty worked best, not as a storm, but as climate. It changed what she wore, what she said, whom she called, how much of herself she allowed into the room. By the time Vanessa entered their life, Claire had already been trained to doubt the weight of her own discomfort. Vanessa was never loud at first. She was clever enough for gentleness. She sent Nathan articles before dawn, praised his strategy in meetings, remembered the bourbon he liked at client dinners, and laughed softly when he complained that Claire did not understand the pressure of carrying an empire on his back. Claire discovered the affair not through one dramatic confession, but through a trail of small permissions Nathan had granted himself. A hotel charge in Milwaukee when he was supposed to be in Minneapolis. A photograph online from a company retreat where Vanessa's hand rested too naturally on his arm. A message preview that appeared on his phone while he was in the shower. "I miss the way you look at me when nobody else is watching." Claire had stood in their bathroom holding that phone, the sound of water running behind the door, feeling not surprised but a terrible confirmation. When she confronted him, Nathan did not look guilty. He looked inconvenienced. He sat at the edge of their bed, still wearing the white shirt she had ironed that morning, and told her their marriage had been over emotionally for a long time. He said Vanessa made him feel seen. He said Claire had become a shadow in her own life, as if he had not spent years turning off the lights. The divorce moved with humiliating efficiency. His attorneys were courteous, which somehow made it worse. They spoke of assets, spousal support, reasonable expectations, and reputational sensitivity. They praised Claire's cooperation while reducing the shared life she had built into numbers that fit neatly into columns. Mutual friends stopped inviting her before the ink was dry. Some sent careful texts full of concern but no loyalty. Others repeated Nathan's version because it was easier to believe a woman had grown bitter than to admit a charming man had been dishonest. The lowest moment came on a rainy Thursday in March when Claire sat alone in the Camry outside a grocery store in Oak Park, unable to go inside because her card had been declined twice that morning and she had $17 in cash tucked inside her wallet. The heater blew weak air against the windshield. Her hands smelled faintly of the cheap soap from the office restroom where she had cried in silence during lunch. She looked at the dashboard, cracked near the vent, and almost laughed at the absurdity of having survived a marriage that looked expensive and finding freedom in a car no one would envy. That was the night she stopped waiting for her old life to apologize. She drove home through the rain, made herself tea, opened the stack of real estate textbooks Marjorie Fields had loaned her, and studied until 2 in the morning. Not because she felt brave, not because she believed in some shining future waiting just beyond the pain. She studied because pain had taken enough from her, and she needed one small thing it could not touch. Month by month, lease by lease, building by building, Claire learned to rebuild a self no court document could assign or erase. Now, walking through Nathan's office as whispers bent around her name, she felt the memory of that rainy night settle quietly behind her ribs. The woman in the parking lot with $17 had not vanished. She had become the foundation. And foundations, Claire now knew, were almost never admired until something heavy depended on them. By the time Claire reached the elevators, the morning had split itself into 2 lives, the one unfolding in whispers behind her, and the one she had built in silence long before anyone in Sterling Plaza knew her name was worth lowering their voice for. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside alone, grateful for the brief privacy of brushed metal walls and soft overhead light. As the car descended toward the lobby, her reflection appeared in 3 pale versions around her, each one composed, each one carrying a history no one outside the doors could fully read. 5 years ago, after the divorce, she had taken the first job that did not ask her to explain the gap in her resume with a smile. Fields Commercial Realty occupied the 2nd floor of a narrow brick building in Oak Park, above a dentist's office and beside a dance studio where children practiced tap routines every Tuesday afternoon. The ceiling tiles were stained from an old leak. The printer jammed if anyone breathed too close to it. The break room held 1 round table, 4 mismatched chairs, and a coffee maker that produced something closer to regret than caffeine. To Claire, it had felt like oxygen. No one there knew Nathan well enough to pity her properly. No one expected her to be charming over lunch or graceful about humiliation. Marjorie Fields, the owner, was 68, sharp-eyed, and allergic to self-pity. On Claire's 3rd day, after watching her reorganize 3 years of lease abstracts without being asked, Marjorie placed a stack of property files on her desk and said, "You read carefully. That is rarer than confidence." Claire did read carefully. At first, she read because she was afraid of making mistakes. Then she read because the language began to reveal itself. Renewal options, escalation clauses, maintenance caps, easements, lien releases, debt service coverage. Ratios. To others, it was paperwork. To Claire, it became a map of hidden pressure. A building was not merely glass and brick. It was promises, obligations, habits, neglect, timing, and leverage. She learned that a strip mall with faded awnings could carry more value than a glamorous lobby if the leases were clean and the tenants paid on time. She learned that powerful people often missed small clauses because they were too busy admiring their own signatures. She learned that patience, the quality Nathan once mocked as passivity, could become a form of precision. Her first commission came from a tired medical office building on the edge of Naperville, where the owner wanted to sell quickly after mismanaging tenant renewals. Claire noticed that 3 leases had below-market rates, but short terms, and that a planned road improvement would change traffic flow within 18 months. Marjorie trusted her analysis. An investor bought the building, restructured the leases, and sold it 2 years later for nearly double. Claire's share was not life-changing money, but it was the first check that had ever felt entirely hers. She carried it home in her purse like a secret flame. She did not buy a new car. She paid off a credit card, repaired the Camry's brakes, and enrolled in evening courses at DePaul University for real estate finance. Her classmates were younger, louder, and fond of using words like disruption and scale. Claire sat near the back with a yellow legal pad, asking fewer questions and writing down better ones. Night after night, she drove home past glittering restaurants and condo towers, eating grocery store soup at her kitchen counter while studying loan structures until the numbers stopped feeling foreign. There was no music swelling behind those years. No dramatic transformation anyone could photograph. Her rebirth looked like spreadsheets at midnight, sensible shoes worn thin on property tours, polite emails sent before dawn, and Sundays spent walking empty commercial corridors with a flashlight because she wanted to understand why one building felt alive and another felt abandoned. Whitman Holdings began as a name on a limited liability company form, and a checking account with a balance so modest it almost embarrassed her. Then came a 4-unit retail property in Berwyn, then a small warehouse near Cicero, then a partnership with a retired contractor who liked that Claire never promised what she could not prove. Each deal taught her how to trust herself in public. Each closing placed one more stone beneath her feet. The Camry remained through all of it, carrying inspection boots in the trunk, contracts on the passenger seat, and once, during a snowstorm, 3 boxes of tile samples for a tenant build-out she could not afford to delay. People underestimated her because of that car. They spoke freely around it. Brokers assumed she was an assistant. Owners assumed she had no capital. Competitors assumed she would fold. Their assumptions became doors they forgot to lock. When Sterling Plaza quietly entered distress after a failed refinancing and months of deferred maintenance disputes, Claire saw what others missed. The tower still looked untouchable from the street, but inside the numbers, weakness had begun to show. She spent 7 months assembling financing, negotiating with lenders, and reviewing every tenant file. The largest tenant, Brooks Meridian Group, stood out at once, not because of Nathan, though his name had stopped her hand for one long breath, but because the lease was sloppy with privilege. Special favors, unapproved alterations, loose arrangements made with people who no longer owned anything. Claire did not pursue the building for revenge. Revenge was too small a reason for that much work. She pursued it because the asset was undervalued, the timing was rare, and she had become the kind of woman who could recognize a door opening even when it led back through a place that once broke her heart. The elevator reached the lobby with a soft chime. Claire opened her eyes. Ahead of her, beyond the glass entrance, the old Camry waited at the curb, modest and steady beneath the morning light. She stepped out, not as the woman people thought had fallen, but as the woman who had learned to rise without making a sound. Outside Sterling Plaza, the morning had grown brighter, but not warmer. A clean October wind moved between the towers, lifting the edges of coats and sending dry leaves skittering along the curb. Claire stood beneath the glass canopy for a moment, letting the city move around her without asking anything of it. Her phone rested silent in her purse. The black folder was tucked under her arm. Across the driveway, the Camry waited with its dull silver paint and narrow line of rust near the back wheel, looking exactly as it had before the world inside the building shifted. That was the strange comfort of ordinary things. They did not change their posture when other people learned the truth. The valet who had hesitated earlier now hurried toward her with a different kind of attention in his face. "Ms. Whitman, would you like me to move your vehicle to the private owner's level?" he asked, careful and respectful, as if the car itself had become part of a question he was afraid to phrase incorrectly. Claire glanced at the reserved entrance leading down to the underground parking garage, where polished sedans and black sport utility vehicles disappeared behind a security gate. For years, spaces like that had seemed to belong to another species of person, someone born knowing how to enter without looking around for permission. "Not yet," she said. "It is fine where it is." The valet nodded, but his eyes flicked once toward the Camry, still trying to make the pieces fit. Claire understood. People trusted symbols more than facts. A luxury car made wealth easy to understand. A quiet woman with a scratched purse and a commercial deed made them uncomfortable. Behind the lobby glass, movement gathered near the elevators. Nathan emerged first, his coat unbuttoned, his phone pressed to his ear though he was not speaking. Vanessa followed a few steps behind, her red coat once again over her shoulders, the color now too bright against the gray morning. They stopped when they saw Claire. For a second, none of them moved. Traffic passed on Wacker Drive with a low wet hiss. Somewhere to Claire's right, a delivery truck beeped as it backed toward the loading entrance, the same loading entrance Brooks Meridian Group had used for private events without written approval. The world had become oddly precise. Nathan ended the call without saying goodbye and slipped the phone into his pocket. "Claire," he said, then paused, remembering too late what the conference room had taught him. "Ms. Whitman." The correction cost him something visible. Claire turned fully toward him. Vanessa stayed slightly behind his shoulder, close enough to be included, far enough to retreat if the conversation turned unfavorable. Claire had seen that posture before. It was the stance of someone who enjoyed power best when someone else absorbed the consequences. Nathan looked at the car, then at her. "Was this the plan?" he asked. "To come here, let everyone find out this way?" There was no apology in the question, only injury wearing formal clothes. Claire felt the old pattern offer itself. Soothe him, explain herself, soften the edges of a truth he found unpleasant. She let the impulse pass. "The transfer date was set by the lender and the attorneys," she said. "Your staff chose the rest." His eyes tightened. The words landed exactly where they belonged. Vanessa gave a small, nervous laugh. "I'm sure no one meant anything by it. It was just surprising, seeing you arrive like that." Claire looked at her. Not sharply. Sharply would have given Vanessa the drama she understood. Claire's gaze was calm enough to make the younger woman look down first. "Like what?" she asked. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no elegant way to say poor. No polished way to say beneath us. Nathan exhaled through his nose and glanced toward the street, as if the city might offer him a better version of himself. "You have to admit," he said, lowering his voice, "this is not exactly how people expect a building owner to arrive." Claire almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because the sentence contained the entire marriage in miniature. How people expect, how things look, how a woman should arrange herself so a man does not feel embarrassed by what she refuses to pretend. She stepped down from the curb and walked toward the Camry. The old key fob rested in her palm, its buttons worn smooth. "That is the difference between us, Nathan," she said, pausing beside the driver's door. "You built a life around being expected. I built one around being underestimated." He had no answer. For once, silence did not belong to him. Claire opened the car door, and the familiar scent of coffee and vanilla rose to meet her like a small loyal thing. Before she got in, she looked back at the tower, at the 41st floor where his employees were probably still whispering, where the packets sat on glossy tables, where every unofficial favor would now need to survive official review. This was not revenge. Revenge would have required her to stay emotionally tied to the wound. This was ownership, clean and documented, the quiet result of years spent turning pain into discipline. The engine took 2 tries to start. Across the curb, Vanessa flinched at the sound, but no one laughed. Claire pulled into traffic with both hands steady on the wheel, leaving Sterling Plaza behind her for the moment, while in the rearview mirror Nathan stood beneath the glass canopy, smaller than she remembered, watching the car he had mocked carry away the one person in his life who had learned to leave without looking back. By the following morning, Sterling Plaza no longer felt like a tower Nathan controlled from the 41st floor. It felt like a building listening through its walls. The change was not visible to anyone passing on the sidewalk. The glass still caught the sunrise in pale gold panels. The revolving doors still turned with quiet efficiency. The lobby still smelled of polished stone, orchids, and coffee from the cafe tucked beside the elevators. Yet inside Brooks Meridian Group, every conversation seemed to bend around Claire Whitman's name. Nathan arrived at 7:20, earlier than usual, in a dark charcoal suit and a coat he had chosen twice before leaving his condo, then hated the fact that he had cared. The private elevator ride to his floor gave him 32 seconds alone with his reflection, and for the first time in years, the man staring back did not look inevitable. He looked rehearsed. When the doors opened, Emily was already waiting near reception with 3 messages, 2 missed calls from legal counsel, and a printed notice from building management requesting access to inspect the altered conference areas that afternoon. They are moving quickly, she said carefully. Nathan took the notice and read it once, then again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less humiliating. They are overreaching, he said. Emily did not answer, which was answer enough. Across the office, Vanessa stood near the marketing bullpen with a small group of employees who scattered too casually when Nathan looked their way. She approached him with a smile that tried to be supportive but could not hide its sharp edge. You should call someone above her, she said softly. There has to be a partner, a board, someone who actually makes the decisions. Nathan looked toward the glass wall of his corner office. Beyond it, the city stretched in expensive layers, indifferent to his discomfort. Whitman Holdings is privately held, he said. The purchase documents list her as managing principal. Vanessa's smile weakened. For the first time, she seemed less offended by Claire's power than frightened by its legitimacy. Nathan hated that too. He hated the way everyone now treated Claire's competence as if it had been waiting in the room all along, and he was the only one foolish enough not to see it. By 9 o'clock, the compliance inspection began. Martin Halpern arrived with Thomas Bell, 2 engineers, and Angela Ruiz from legal. They wore no drama on their faces, only the calm concentration of people carrying clipboards, floor plans, and authority that did not need to raise its voice. Nathan walked with them through the renovated client lounge, past the imported stone bar Vanessa had insisted made the office feel more premium, past the sliding glass partitions installed without final approval, past the private event storage where Brooks Meridian had kept branded cases of wine glasses, lighting equipment, and folded step-and-repeat banners for parties the lease had never permitted. Each item was photographed. Each measurement was noted. Each explanation Nathan offered seemed to shrink as it crossed the air. The prior owner approved this verbally, he said near the lounge. Thomas looked up from his tablet. Do you have written confirmation? Nathan's mouth tightened. Our understanding was clear. Angela made a note. The lease requires written consent. It was not an accusation. That was what made it so difficult to fight. Accusations could be challenged, softened, reframed. Documentation simply stood there. Vanessa stayed near the doorway, arms folded, her face composed for the employees watching through the glass, but her eyes followed the inspectors with growing resentment. She had helped design this office as a monument to Nathan's new era, a place where clients would step off the elevator and feel they had entered the future. Now every expensive choice was being reduced to a line item, every flourish judged against a contract no one had bothered to respect, because no one had imagined the building would one day belong to Claire. At 10:15, the elevator chimed again. The sound was small, but the office seemed to hear it together. Claire stepped out wearing a navy coat and carrying no visible folder this time, only a slim leather portfolio and the kind of stillness that made the space around her rearrange. She did not look at Nathan first. She greeted Martin, spoke briefly with Angela, and asked Thomas whether the fire egress review had been completed. The question was practical, specific, and devastating in its ordinariness. She was not there to haunt him. She was there to run the building. Nathan crossed the reception area before he could stop himself. Ms. Whitman, he said, the title tasting unfamiliar but necessary. Claire turned. Employees pretended not to listen. Vanessa went very still behind him. May we speak privately? Nathan asked. Claire studied him for one breath. If it concerns the lease, Angela should be present. It concerns us. The words left him lower than intended, and for a moment he saw something flicker in her eyes, not softness, but memory passing behind glass. Claire's voice remained even. There is no us in this building, Nathan. There is ownership, tenancy, and compliance. The sentence did not humiliate him loudly. It did something worse. It returned him to the language he had always claimed to. Respect. Around them, the office held its breath. Nathan looked at the woman he had once called ordinary and realized she had not come back to wound him. She had come back with terms. And terms, unlike feelings, could not be charmed into forgetting. Claire had learned long ago that the most important conversations were rarely the loudest ones. They happened in pauses, in corrected names, in the small space between what a person wanted to say and what the room would allow them to admit. Standing in the reception area of Brooks Meridian Group, with the compliance team moving methodically behind her and half the office pretending not to listen, she watched Nathan discover the limits of charm in real time. He still looked like the man who had once entered hotel ballrooms, as if applause were inevitable. The suit, the watch, the controlled voice, the polished grief of a man who believed an old connection should grant him private access. But Sterling Plaza did not run on history. It ran on contracts, insurance requirements, maintenance schedules, and signatures recorded before breakfast at the Cook County Recorder of Deeds. Claire turned slightly toward Angela Ruiz, who had already stepped closer with a tablet in hand. "Ms. Ruiz will join us," Claire said. 5 minutes. Nathan's face held steady, but the muscles near his jaw moved once. He led them into a smaller conference room beside the reception area, a glass box named Denver, with a round table, 6 leather chairs, and a view of the loading dock entrance below. Vanessa started to follow, but Claire paused at the doorway. "This is a tenant matter with legal counsel present." The sentence was polite enough to pass as procedure, firm enough to close the door. Vanessa stopped with one hand still near the handle, her expression caught between offense and disbelief. Nathan looked back at her, then away, and for once he did not rescue the moment. Inside the room, Angela remained standing near the wall, quiet but visible. Claire took a chair. Nathan did not sit right away. He walked to the window, looked down at the service lane, then turned with a softened expression Claire recognized too well. It was the face he used when he wanted to turn accountability into nostalgia. "I handled this badly yesterday," he said. The comment about the car. Vanessa's comment. The people outside. It was unnecessary. Claire waited. An apology that circled the truth without landing on it was still searching for a safer airport. Nathan exhaled. "I am sorry." The words were correct. The room did not change. Claire folded her hands on the table. "Thank you." His eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with disappointment that the apology had not purchased warmth. "That is all?" he asked. "For now, yes." He laughed once, softly, without humor. "Claire, come on. You know me better than this." She looked at him then, fully. "I didn't know you." The past tense struck the glass room harder than either of them expected. Nathan lowered himself into the chair across from her. For a moment, without the audience, age showed on him in fine lines near his eyes, in the tired set of his shoulders, in the faint uncertainty beneath the expensive grooming. "I did not know it was your company," he said. "If I had, I would have handled things differently." Claire felt the old wound stir, not open, but remind her where it had been. "That is not the reassurance you think it is." Angela's tablet made a soft sound as she received a message, but she did not look up. Nathan leaned forward. "I am trying to make this right." "No," Claire said gently. "You are trying to make this comfortable." The words settled between them with such precision that even Nathan looked briefly unable to reject them. Outside the room, Thomas Bell walked past with an engineer, both discussing sprinkler clearance near the altered lounge. The world was continuing, practical and unromantic, refusing to shape itself around Nathan's discomfort. He looked toward the hallway, then back at her. "What do you want?" The question was familiar. During the divorce, he had asked it with exhaustion, as if her needs were an administrative burden. Now he asked because he finally understood she had the authority to answer. Claire opened her portfolio and removed a single page. "Brooks Meridian Group will receive the formal notice by end of business today. 30 days to cure outstanding fees. 60 days to submit compliance documentation. 90 days to restore or properly permit all unauthorized alterations, subject to ownership approval. Failure to meet those deadlines will trigger default remedies under the lease." Nathan stared at the page. "That could disrupt operations. Then you should take it seriously. And if we comply, then you remain a tenant in good standing." He looked up slowly. "That is it." Claire nodded. "That is it." The simplicity seemed to unsettle him more than punishment would have. He had expected revenge dressed as business. He had prepared to accuse her of bitterness, to frame her authority as emotion. But she had given him terms any owner could defend, terms any competent tenant should have followed before she ever walked through the door. Nathan's voice dropped. "You really did not do this because of me." Claire allowed herself one quiet breath before answering. "Nathan, I bought a 42-story commercial property in downtown Chicago. You occupy 1 floor. Something in his face changed then, a small collapse of scale. For years he had imagined himself central to her pain, perhaps even central to her recovery. The truth was less flattering. He had been part of the past, not the purpose of the future. Claire stood, and Angela moved with her. At the door, Nathan said her name, this time without calculation. She paused but did not turn all the way back. I was wrong about you, he said. Claire looked at the glass wall, at the employees beyond it, at Vanessa waiting with her arms folded and her smile gone. Yes, she said softly. You were. Then she opened the door, stepping back into the bright office where everyone could see her leave calmly, while Nathan remained seated with the notice in his hand and the knowledge that the woman he had underestimated was not standing above him out of cruelty. She was standing where her work had placed her. By late afternoon, the inspection reports had begun to do what truth often did when written down clearly. They traveled farther than rumor and required less decoration. Brooks Meridian Group received the formal notice at 4:35, delivered by email, certified mail, and a hand-delivered packet that Emily signed for with a face carefully trained into neutrality. The office had spent the day pretending to return to normal, but normal had become a costume that no longer fit. People spoke more softly near the glass walls. Department heads asked legal questions they should have asked years ago. Vanessa remained in her office with the door half closed, scrolling through documents she had never bothered to understand when the world still seemed arranged in her favor. Nathan stayed behind his desk, reading the notice as the sun lowered over Chicago and painted the river copper between the towers. The terms were not cruel. That was the part that unsettled him most. There was no vindictive language, no personal reference, no hidden blade wrapped in sentiment. The letter cited dates, clauses, balances, required submissions, and reasonable deadlines. It was fair, and because it was fair, he could not dismiss it as revenge. Fairness left him no performance to give. Across the building, Claire sat in a temporary management office on the mezzanine level, reviewing the same report with Martin Halpern and Angela Ruiz. The room was modest compared with the 41st floor, furnished with a square table, a credenza, and 2 windows overlooking the alley where delivery trucks came and went. Claire liked it. There was something honest about back entrances, service elevators, maintenance logs, and the unseen machinery that kept impressive places standing. Glamour lived upstairs. Responsibility lived here. Martin pointed to a line in the facility summary. The lounge modifications are not unsafe, but they were never permitted through the building. We can require proper drawings and review before approval. Claire nodded. Then that is what we do. Angela glanced up from her laptop. You know they may claim selective enforcement. Claire looked at the highlighted tenant list spread across the table. Then we apply the same review to every tenant with flagged issues. No exceptions. Martin's expression softened almost imperceptibly, the way older professionals sometimes responded when someone younger chose principle. Over spectacle. That will take longer. Then it takes longer, Claire said. Outside the window, the alley caught the last gray light of day. A man in a navy work jacket guided a delivery cart over a metal ramp. Somewhere above them, hundreds of people were finishing emails, checking traffic, planning dinners, unaware of the pipes, permits, loading schedules, and quiet decisions beneath their feet. Claire had once believed power looked like the corner office, the perfect dress, the right last name spoken warmly by people who mattered. Now she knew power could look like a woman sitting in an unremarkable room, choosing consistency when inconsistency would have been easier. Her phone buzzed once on the table. A message from Marjorie Fields appeared, short as always. Heard the closing recorded. Proud of you. Do not let the shiny people distract you from the numbers. Claire smiled for the first time that day, a real smile, small and private. She typed back, I will not. Then she placed the phone face down and returned to the report. By 6:15, most of the building had emptied. The lobby softened under evening light, its marble floors reflecting the gold glow from the elevators. Claire walked through it alone, carrying no folder now, only her purse and the quiet fatigue of a long day honestly spent. Near the front desk, the young valet from the morning stood straighter when he saw her. Your car is still out front, Ms. Whitman, he said. I kept an eye on it. There was no mockery in his voice, only kindness. Claire thanked him. As she approached the glass doors, she saw Nathan standing near one of the planters outside, his coat collar turned against the wind. For a moment, she considered another exit. Not because she feared him, but because peace sometimes meant refusing unnecessary echoes. Then he looked up and stepped aside, not blocking her path, Not performing confidence, simply making room. That was new. Vanessa was not with him. The absence said its own quiet sentence. Claire passed through the doors into the cool evening. The Camry waited at the curb beneath the lights of the tower, still humble, still scratched, still hers. Nathan watched her approach. And this time he did not look amused. He looked tired, and perhaps, for the first time, honest enough to be silent. "The terms are fair," he said. Claire stopped beside the driver's door, hand resting on the handle. "They are the terms every tenant should have had." He nodded slowly. "I know." The words did not repair anything. They did not need to. Some acknowledgments were not bridges back, but doors closing with dignity. Claire opened the car door. The interior light came on, warm and familiar. Behind Nathan, Sterling Plaza rose into the darkening sky, no longer a monument to the life that had rejected her, but an asset, a responsibility, a building full of people who would wake tomorrow under rules applied evenly because she had decided fairness was stronger than revenge. Nathan glanced once at the car, then at her. "You kept it all this time." Claire looked at the worn steering wheel, the faded seats, the small world that had carried her through rain, fear, night classes, inspections, and every mile between humiliation and freedom. "It kept me moving," she said. Then she got in, started the engine, and drove into the evening traffic, leaving behind a man, a building, and a past that had finally learned the difference between losing her and being left behind. The next morning, Claire arrived at Sterling Plaza before the lobby filled with footsteps. Dawn had barely opened over Chicago, turning the glass tower pale blue at the edges, and for once the curb was almost empty. No crowd stood on the marble steps. No laughter waited by the planters. No red coat flashed like a warning beside the doors. There was only the soft rumble of a street sweeper, the distant call of a delivery driver, and the old Camry settling into silence after another loyal drive through early traffic. Claire sat behind the wheel for a moment with her hands resting lightly at 10 and 2, looking up through the windshield at the building she now owned. It did not feel like victory in the way movies promised victory would feel. There was no rush of triumph, no desire to call anyone and prove what had happened, no sudden hunger to be admired by the people who had once mistaken her quiet for weakness. What she felt was steadier than that. It was peace with structure, peace with paperwork, peace with keys, clauses, maintenance schedules, and a future that did not require Nathan Brooks to understand her in order for it to be real. She stepped out into the cool morning and closed the car door gently. The valet was not on duty yet, so she fed the meter herself, slipping quarters into the machine with a small private smile at the absurdity of it. The owner of a 42-story office building paying for street parking beside her own front entrance. Years ago, she might have seen contradiction in that. Now she saw freedom. Inside, the night security guard looked up from the desk and smiled. "Good morning, Ms. Whitman." "Good morning, Mr. Alvarez." His eyebrows lifted slightly because she had remembered his name from the employee roster Martin had sent the night before. Claire noticed, but did not mention it. Respect, she had learned, cost very little and changed the temperature of a room faster than money. She rode the elevator to the mezzanine office, where a stack of tenant files waited beside a paper cup of coffee Martin must have left for her. On top of the file sat a handwritten note from him. First owner in 10 years who asked for the maintenance backlog before the rent roll. Good sign. Claire touched the edge of the note, then placed it carefully in her planner. By 9 o'clock, the building was alive. Elevators opened and closed. Shoes clicked across marble. The cafe steamed milk and warmed muffins. People from Brooks Meridian Group passed through the lobby with quieter faces than before, some avoiding her eyes, others offering cautious nods. Claire returned each nod the same way, neither warm enough to excuse what had happened nor cold enough to become what had hurt her. Near the cafe, one of the young analysts who had laughed on the first morning approached her with his coffee held in both hands. He could not have been more than 26. His face was red before he spoke. "Ms. Whitman, I wanted to apologize for the other day. I acted like a child." Claire looked at him for a moment. The lobby noise moved around them, soft and bright. "Do better next time," she said, "especially when nobody important is watching." He nodded, chastened and relieved, and hurried toward the elevators. She did not need him to suffer. She needed him to remember. Just before noon, Claire walked outside to find a reserved sign being installed near the front curb. Martin stood beside the valet, reviewing the placement. The sign read Owner Parking, Whitman Holdings. Claire looked from the sign to her Camry, parked a few feet away, its silver paint dull beneath the autumn sun. Martin followed her gaze. We can move your car into the private garage whenever you prefer. Claire considered it. The garage would be warmer in winter, safer in storms, more sensible in every way. But beyond the glass doors, people were still learning what the building had learned first. That worth did not always arrive polished, that power did not always announce itself in black cars and expensive engines, that a woman could be underestimated all the way to the deed. Leave it here for today, she said. Martin's mouth twitched with the hint of a smile. Of course. Across the street, on the 41st floor, Nathan stood behind the window of his corner office, small behind all that glass. He watched Claire speak with the staff, watched the valet point toward the new sign, watched the Camry remain exactly where everyone could see it. He did not call. He did not come down. Some lessons, finally, had learned to stay silent. Claire looked up once, not searching for him, but taking in the tower as a whole. The offices, the windows, the people, the systems, the 1,000 quiet responsibilities now connected to her name. Then she turned back to the curb, unlocked the Camry, and placed a fresh folder on the passenger seat. There would be other buildings, other rooms, other people who mistook simplicity for failure because they had never learned to recognize discipline without decoration. Claire no longer feared them. She had become fluent in being underestimated. Before stepping back inside, she rested her hand on the roof of the old car, feeling the cool metal beneath her palm. It had carried her through endings, through rain, through night classes, through debt, through doubt, through the long, unglamorous miles of becoming. Let them see it, she thought. Let them see all of it. Then Claire Whitman walked through the front doors of Sterling Plaza, not as someone returning to prove a point, but as someone arriving for work, while the car they once laughed at waited in the sunlight like a quiet signature beneath the building that now bore her name.